Yeah, I mean, there's lots of applications. And look, I don't want it to be just jackfruit food system, right? Like, but for us, part of our mission is to create a more diverse food system.
I'm glad that you're going in that direction. Do you know why other big, the Beyond Meats and the Impossible Foods decided to go the route of like extremely processed foods rather than trying to change mindsets and offer very tasty alternatives to meat that don't need to replicate the look and feel of meat?
First off, I just want to say, there has been a lot of misinformation funded by the meat lobby.
You're watching Next Big Wave, the podcast for founders by founders in Southeast Asia. In this episode, we're going to talk about founder journeys, growth strategies, and much more. Just to help me out, if you could like and subscribe, it would be awesome. And let's get into the episode.
Point, there's a question you don't feel comfortable answering, or you feel like your answer is erroneous and you want to change it, let me know. We can edit it all out, so it's really not a problem. Feel comfortable. All right, cool.
Alrighty.
All right, so welcome to today's episode of Next Big Wave. Today, I'm joined by Blair Crichton. Sorry about that. I have to pronounce it a couple more times. The CH for French people is so bad. So Crichton. Okay.
Yeah? Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right, sorry about that. All right, so welcome to today's episode of Next Big Wave. Today, I'm joined by Blair Crichton, co-founder of Karana. Blair, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast because food tech is not something I get to talk to a lot about. And I know it's really, really important. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in this industry. So Blair, welcome to the show.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on board, Tim. And yeah, look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, so Blair, you're currently in Hong Kong, but you're not from Southeast Asia. Can you walk me through sort of your background, where you're from originally, and how you ended up in Asia?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I am. I was born in Hong Kong, so
Oh, you were. Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went full circle then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I pretty much consider Hong Kong home, but I've lived in 9 cities and I think 6 countries. So, I've lived all over the place, but I found myself coming back, where my roots are here.
Beautiful.
And, yeah.
But you spent quite a bit of time in the US from what I see on your LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, so I studied, worked and studied in the US. So first moved there with work in 2016, and then quit that was when I was a banker in my former life, and went to business school in the US, and then was working in the clean tech food tech space in San Francisco for a year before moving back to Singapore.
Sweet. So how did you make the move from being a banker, and I can relate to that, to becoming an entrepreneur? Like, that's quite a journey, completely different sort of profile of work. So yeah, walk me through the idea and the journey there.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess it all starts with when I was young. So, I've always been very kind of passionate about animals and the environment. One fact that few people know is I first became a vegetarian when I was age 4, when I found out where meat came from, and so I've always had this sort of like passion for the environment, but never really saw a chance to make that part of my professional life, and just sort of did the well-trodden path, ended up in banking. And in around 2016, when I quit banking to go to business school, it was sort of this perfect moment where Paris Accord had just happened, Tesla Model 3 had just been launched, and suddenly this sort of light bulb went off, and I was like, wow, I could actually work in the for-profit sector, but still be having an impact on the environment. And so, going into business school, I decided that's what I wanted to do. I want to come out and be working in something that's, having an impact on climate. Didn't know what. Started exploring a ton of stuff, and started following this tiny little company that no one had really heard of back then, called Impossible Foods, and another one called Beyond Meat, and ended up going to work for Impossible Foods pre-launch. They had already raised quite a bit of capital, but that really catapulted me into working in the food and agriculture space, and haven't looked back since.
Very cool, very cool. And so you ended up building your own venture in the food tech and the circular economy, food tech, etc. Can you walk me through what Karana does and why you chose to do that? I mean, I understand your background going through this sort of impossible food innovation and then building that, but why specifically jackfruit and why Karana?
Yeah, so as I kind of started to learn more about the food industry, what I realized is we need to go a layer deeper than just talking about removing animals from the food system. I mean, it is important to reduce the amount of animals that we're consuming, but on top of that, we actually have over the past sort of 50, 60 years developed this heavily industrialized food system that basically doesn't work in sync with nature. For thousands of years, we worked in sync with nature and we replenished the soils. And what we've done now is basically move to a system that take without giving back. And unfortunately, by the time we finished our chat today, we probably would have lost about another 1,000 soccer fields worth of fertile soil and forests. And what we realized is we needed to go beyond the number of crops that we're using and start to diversify our system and go back towards that traditional model. In fact, only 4 crops make up 2/3 of our farm calories globally. And when I found that out, I was truly shocked because there are thousands of non-edible plant species, but 4 make up 2/3 of what the calories that we get globally. And they're largely grown in monocrop industrial agriculture that destroys the soil, has a whole load of environmental impacts around loss of biodiversity, and also are placing significant pressure on food security. And if we don't do something, we're not going to be able to feed the world in another 50 years. And so, that really spurred me to kind of go deeper than what I was doing at Impossible. And we landed on jackfruit as a crop that really could be a crop of the future. And, our mission is to scale jackfruit to feed millions of people and to drive regenerative agroforestry with that. And really what that means is a forest farming system that regenerates the soil and protects biodiversity. And so that's what I'm working on. And yeah, I mean, jackfruit specifically, you asked why jackfruit. Jackfruit has many, many pluses for it. It's very high yielding. It's actually the highest yielding tree fruit in the world. It's very easy to grow. And it's also importantly can be an anchor crop in these sustainable forest farm systems. And generally is not actually grown as the cash crop. It's used as a shade crop. And then other crops like cacao, coffee, herbs, tea, spices, etc., are grown around that. And in fact, currently upwards of 60% of the world's jackfruit crop goes to waste because there isn't the commercial offtake for it, and the infrastructure to bring that to market in an efficient way. And that's what we're building.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. I mean, being in Thailand, I've definitely encountered jackfruit, had it in various different ways. But, if it's going to be the fruit of the future or the food of the future, how do you see deriving products from jackfruit so that your nutrition is not so, sort of boring or single flavored? Are there different applications to jackfruit than just cooking it or eating it as is? I'm not too familiar with the derivatives from jackfruit.
If you're watching this and you're a B2B startup founder in Southeast Asia, struggling to grow your startup, we have a whole community of founders just like you. And on a weekly basis, we discuss strategies and growth hacks. We'd love to have you amongst us. Feel free to join at nextbigwave.co or find the link in the description. I'll see you there.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of applications. And look, I don't want it to be just jackfruit food system, right? For us, part of our mission is to create a more diverse food system, but jackfruit can definitely be a part of that food system, and has a role to play as an anchor crop in these sort of forest farm systems. But yeah, I mean, there are lots of use cases. So our first application is in sort of plant forward dining, which is, as a replacement for meat at the center of plate, but trying not to sort of be a meat alternative, so to speak, and imitating pork or beef and saying this is exactly like it is. We're celebrating the fact that it's jackfruit, but you get this very satisfying and interesting culinary experience that is quite meaty. So that's one use case. Obviously, across Southeast Asia, a lot of people will be familiar with sweet jackfruit. It's a delicious fruit in itself. There's lots of other applications. The seeds are highly nutritious. There's also potential to do things with the flour. The jackfruit flour, it's a gluten-free, high-fiber flour. And many more that we're exploring as well. So it's has a lot of potential. We just need to create the market and build the infrastructure to get it to market efficiently.
Yeah, like outside of this conversation, I think I'd love to learn more about it, because I had dinner with a friend who's chasing a Michelin star. He's building a restaurant in Phuket, and it's a plant-based Michelin star or Michelin star applicant, and he hasn't mentioned jackfruit at all, so I should pitch it to him, because you mentioned all these different great applications and really eating it for what it is, and I love that notion. So definitely would love to hear more ideas from your end on how he could maybe implement that into his restaurant. But I like what you said about biodiversity, because I'm also interested in the future of food to some extent, because I don't know much about it, but I do my research, and there's always these rebuttals to people who say, hey, you should only eat plant-based. And then people say, well, when you're farming for avocados, you're killing everything around that space that you're, trying to grow this crop. And you're sort of agreeing with that point and saying, hey, that's not what we should be doing. We should sort of grow different crops in a sort of a biodiverse environment. So can you walk me through more about that? Because not many people know that, growing one crop alone is not the best way to do it. So maybe we can educate people on how to do the best sort of cultivation possible.
Yeah, and I'm no means an expert on this. I have someone on my team who's much more knowledgeable, but I'll do my best from someone who's passionate about it. So I think that the biggest issue with monocrop systems is that, it basically creates a model where you are just taking from the soil and not putting nutrients back in. And as a result, you then have to rely on fertilizers to add nutrients to the soil. That creates a lot of issues around runoff, and gradually that soil declines over time. Whereas a system that is what we call intercrop, which is more than one crop, basically enables a sort of a more natural ecosystem to evolve, and that causes nutrients to be put back into the soil. So you can both take and give back, and you reduce your reliance on fertilizers. Now, there are many ways in which that can be done, and often referred to as regenerative agriculture, and there are many different formats that can take place. So in our case, we're focusing specifically on agroforestry, which, as I explained earlier, is sort of a forest farm. And forest farms are great for biodiversity because they also attract, all the sort of creatures and animals that might live in that forest, which also play an important role in the ecosystem and important role in the soil health. Attracting pollinators that, will then pollinate other crops, your bees and butterflies and so on. But also because you're utilizing trees which have root systems, and they're perennial crops rather than annual crop, meaning that they are permanently planted rather than pulled up every year and then you till the soil and replant them. That actually both sequesters carbon, but also the root systems, we're learning a lot now about how they help balance the nutrients in the soil and put back as well as taking out. And so by having trees as sort of anchors in your forestry, your farm system, it actually over time will reduce the need or reliance on fertilizers, will enable high yields. So it's actually farmer friendly, but also then has positive environmental impacts as well. I mean, I'm sure we could spend a whole podcast talking about this, but at a high level, that's sort of.
Yeah, I think it's good to educate people on it, because if you haven't done any research or been exposed to it, you might not know about that. And funny enough, I'm getting fed all sorts of videos about that, mostly from agriculture in Southeast Asia, where Thai rice farmers are putting crabs into their fields to kind of kill the pests and then fertilize the soil. And then at the end of the season, they can also sell the crabs. There's all sorts of like integrated farming in Southeast Asia. And my question is this more of a trend or like a state of farming in Southeast Asia? And is this going to start happening in the rest of the world? Or what's the status of this type of mentality right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not happening fast enough, in my opinion, globally, but, there's certainly big movements around this globally. And, not just in Southeast Asia, but you're right. I mean, rice farming does have huge issues and is actually one of those four crops I mentioned earlier. And, some of the practices that have evolved have not been the best for the environment and the sort of the ecosystem that it's grown in. So, the regenerative farming model is gaining steam. Some of the world's biggest food companies, for example, your Unilevers or Nestle's, have actually made commitments to increasing percentage of ingredients that they source from regenerative farming systems. There is, some danger of greenwashing coming out of this because there is no agreed upon definition of what regenerative is. And, there are some things that are claiming to be regenerative that probably aren't necessarily that regenerative. And also, there is a crossover between regenerative, I guess, crop agriculture, for want of using a more technical word, and regenerative animal agriculture. The latter, I'm much more skeptical on, and a lot of climate scientists are skeptical on as well. So, you have people out there now claiming that you've got regenerative beef that, is giving back to the soil. And a lot of questions around the science behind that. But on the crop side of things, there's certainly a lot of moves that have been made. And I think the sort of in general, the food system is waking up to the fact that we need to make changes in order to both have food security, to feed the population that is still growing, but also to have better environmental impacts. And it's actually becoming a risk for big food companies as well, if you think about it. As regulation starts to come in that expands the scope of reporting to, like in the EU now, you have scope 3 reporting that takes into account biodiversity impact of your operations. It is becoming increasingly a risk, both from a reporting and ESG perspective, but also from a actually bottom line perspective. If the crops that you rely on can't be fertilized anymore because pollinators have died off because of lack of biodiversity, that's going to lead to risk to your supply chain. So increasingly it's becoming a talking point. There's a lot more that can be done and a lot quicker. I think, much like climate in general, there's a lot of talking and still not a lot of action.
I mean, to me, it's like, yeah, everyone's kind of aware of it, but are they willing to change their habits and to stop having access to every single crop in the world at any given moment of the year? I think that's going to probably make a difference. And I don't know how willing people are to change their eating habits. So I wonder if the discussion starts with people or with corporations or with startups like yourselves. So we can answer that first. And I think as a follow-up question, I'm wondering if the VC money has a lot of interest in this field, and maybe you can talk to that in a second point.
Yeah, sure. So on the first point, look, you have to meet consumers where they are, right? And, similar to, when we talk about removing animals from the food system, I'm personally a vegan, but I'm not saying every person out there should be a vegan, because I know that that's just, unrealistic to expect, but to encourage people, hey, 1, 2, 3 days a week, maybe swap out, whatever animal protein you're having and use jackfruit or use tofu or, something like that. And reduce your impact. And I think it goes the same for this. And I think you can still develop regenerative systems that enable crops to be available. Of course, seasonality and local seasonal crops is probably the best model. But let's be realistic. People still want their tomatoes year round or their strawberries year round or whatever it might be, their jackfruit year round. Um, so I think, you can still implement regenerative and better farming practices that is still, you know, using technology as well to make sure that you can have crop availability year round. It's not a, how we farmed 1,000 years, for the last 1,000 years, or technology on either side, and there's nowhere in the middle. I think it's somewhere in the middle where you use a blend of both. Um, I think the pendulum swung too far to rely on these industrialized farming practices, fertilizers, etc. And we need to just come back somewhere into the middle now. So I think it's about trying to give consumers what they're used to, and then nudging them in the right direction, as well as giving them something that's interesting and tastes good and is delicious and isn't a compromise. That's going to make it a lot easier for them. To your second question on VC interest, it's not. I wouldn't say it's the hottest space out there right now, but it's also a general reflection of a downturn in VC investing generally. It's been a tough couple of years across the board for startups. Save for one or two specific areas like AI. VC investing has been down. There was a rush into food tech a few years ago, and some companies that probably shouldn't have been funded got funded. And I think we're seeing a normalization. We're seeing, unfortunately, quite a few failures, but some of those probably are companies that didn't have the right proposition or didn't have the right technology. And so, that's a sort of a realignment. There is still a lot of interest in the impact space. So impact investors and funds, maybe not necessarily VC, but more either family offices or foundational work. But there are some climate-focused impact funds that are specifically looking at biodiversity. I can tell you there's not a conference that I go to now on the sustainability side where the term biodiversity and nature-based solutions aren't brought up and aren't discussed about. And, it's certainly a hot topic. And so, I'm hoping to see the sort of investing money come back as kind of the market normalizes and investing comes back. Certainly valuations have changed a lot from where they were a couple of years ago, but it's probably no bad thing. So I think it's both a reflection of the broader market and also some sort of evaluation. And I think you'll see that what someone I the other day referred to quite aptly as tourists won't be coming along anymore. So there's a sort of generalist funds or tech funds that were taking on food technology, and it's more specialized funds or climate and impact funds.
Mm. And did you raise money for Karana, or were you self-funded so far?
No, yeah, we've raised money. We've done a seed and a seed extension round. It's we like many startups over the last 18 months have had to rationalize a lot, control costs, and extend runway as the funding and dynamics and the funding environment changed. And really, we're now focused on getting to profitability, cash flow break even. We are dipping in and out at the moment. We have some months where we are actually break even or positive on a cash flow perspective, and trying to get that consistently.
Yeah, and I think some people have trouble understanding how food tech works because you're literally working in food and agriculture, but you also have technologies. And what about your type of business makes it a startup, like a tech startup? Can you walk us through the technologies and what things you're building other than the agriculture itself?
Yeah, so I think first off, I would say we aren't a tech startup. I think that's one thing we've um, come to terms with in the past sort of year or so. Before we were very much trying to position ourselves as a tech startup, and that's when a lot of the tourists were coming in. Yes, there is absolutely technology in what we're doing, but we're not a tech startup in the sense of like a software company that can scale super quickly and has super high margins. Food business, that's just not the reality. Yes, there's a lot of scale there. It's a massive industry. We're talking trillions of dollars. Everyone eats, right? Um,
Of course, yeah,
but
yeah.
but the dynamics are different, and you need investors that understand that. And there certainly are those kind of investors that do understand it. There's funds that do invest, year in year out in the food and agriculture industry and understand that. But their return profiles, I think, is slightly different than, say, a tech or a generalist investor might be. Um, but from to answer your question on what our technology is, so our technology is broad across the value chain. So what we're building is from the farm gate onwards. So we're not farmers. We work with farmers to implement these sustainable farming practices, but we are about efficient aggregation because it's a lot of smallholder farmers. Um, then innovative processing and product development. And that's largely where the technology sits in those two stages, where we do have some proprietary processing techniques around, when the jackfruit is getting put through its processing that might enhance texture or get the desired end application, and then as well in sort of formulation and product development. So we have a range of jackfruit products from our brown jackfruit all the way through to jackfruit burger patties, for example. Um, and there are certain, I guess, trade secrets in how those are formulated. But we do have a couple of patents on some of our processing steps. One thing we like to say, though, is that we're minimally processed. We are trying to do it as light as possible. I liken it to sort of molecular gastronomy, just sort of at a more commercial or industrial scale. So we're manipulating it using our understanding of food chemistry, but without sort of adding in heavy chemicals or additives or denaturing the food. So it's a kind of a fine line to walk, a tightrope where we're trying to be as natural as possible, but also use food technology. And it kind of goes back to what I said before about meeting somewhere in the middle. Some tradition, some not to tradition, but utilizing technology to enhance that and improve that. And that's where we stand.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I completely agree with you. Like for me, one of my biggest problems with all these food techs that were, trying to make an impact was they're offering meat alternatives, but with over processed and, in my opinion, sound unhealthy types of foods. And I'd much rather eat, vegetables the way they're meant to taste, or even somewhat processed, but without all the additives and preserved and all that. So I'm glad that you're going in that direction. Do you know why other big, the Beyond Meats and the Impossible Foods decided to go the route of like extremely processed foods rather than trying to change mindsets and offer very tasty alternatives to meat that don't need to replicate the look and feel of meat?
Yeah, I mean it's a complex topic with a lot to unpack there. But first off, I just want to say, there has been a lot of misinformation funded by the meat lobby, which incidentally is now larger than sort of the coal and fuel lobby. So around how heavily processed these products are. Yes, they're
Okay.
definitely processed. I'm not going to shy away from that, but to call them ultra high processed, which is some of the sort of stuff that's coming out now, I think is a bit disingenuous. And you have to look at a lot of food products out there. I mean, how heavily processed they are, including a lot of meat products. I mean, you take salami, for example, or ham. It's pretty heavily processed. So I think first put that in perspective. But to answer your question around why they went that route, so I think firstly it was about what you said before around consumer behavior and like not wanting to compromise and change. So the idea was like if we can replicate one for one what the consumer experience. So something tastes exactly the same, texturally it's the same, nutritionally it's the same, then there's no argument against changing, against swapping. It's like, well, yeah, of course I don't want to kill animals and kill the environment if I can have the same experience. And I for one had many friends that resonate with that, and family and people that I've spoken to over my past 6-7 years working in this industry. So I think that was the first standing point. Secondly, I think it comes back to what we're talking about, the investors. They wanted to appease tech investors that were coming into the space by showing that they had a deep tech platform and IP platform that would enable them to raise money and achieve their mission. And I think that's laudable. And some of the technology is freaking amazing that they've developed. I mean, when I worked at Impossible Foods, the Heat platform that they built is incredible, and the science behind it is just truly mind blowing. And they had really, really smart people working on it. And honestly, I think that it's not an either or. I think in the future, it's going to, we need all solutions to solve the challenges facing our food system. It's just, you don't want to necessarily eat an Impossible burger every day, just like you're probably not going to eat a beef burger every day, because it's maybe not the healthiest thing for you, but it's a treat every now and then. I'll still have it if I'm, going to a barbecue, and that's what's available. It's an enjoyable product. But me personally, I'm 85% whole food, plant-based. I'm trying to eat, like you said, whole vegetable, whole plants. But I mean, there's a lot of crap out there in the food industry, and a lot of people eat a lot of crap. So, I mean, it's about giving them the range of options. And I'm not an absolutist, I'm still going to eat stuff that's bad for me from time to time, and it's because it's enjoyable ultimately.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah.
I mean, it's a tricky question, a tricky sort of thing to think about. And you mentioned you have to meet the consumers where they are, right? And you can look at it both ways. You can think, well, people don't know what's best for them, but also, why would you stop them from doing whatever they want, right? So it's kind of tough. Yeah. It's a very tricky scenario.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the things about the food industry is, it's like a lot of the blame gets placed on the food industry for developing products that are terrible for people's health. And I think that's not unwarranted, but also it's that providing what consumers demand and are asking for, and it's this catch-22, and, who's responsible for what. But I think everything in moderation is really the best answer.
I agree. Let's get back to Southeast Asia, though, because you said, I forgot about this, or we didn't discuss it, but you were born in Hong Kong, went around, came back to Hong Kong. Other than coming back to your roots, was there a specific reason for coming back to Asia to build a business here? Do you find it a good place to be building this type of business? Let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started the company in Singapore, and I first moved to Singapore, and I now split my time sort of between Singapore and Hong Kong. Personally, I had family here, and my partner's here. But the reason we chose Singapore was sort of I guess there were a number of reasons. So firstly, they built a thriving startup ecosystem. I think it's probably one of the best in Southeast Asia, and it's sort of a lot of support for startups there, a lot of investors and so on. So it kind of made sense from that perspective. Secondly, from a sourcing location, jackfruit is a tropical and subtropical fruit. So the biggest sourcing region is all across South and Southeast Asia. Singapore is very strategically located for that. And then thirdly, specifically to what we're doing, Singapore has made it a strategic priority to focus on future food and food tech, because they see how they're impacted by climate change and food insecurity, and so it's important to them. And so that's meant that there's a lot of sort of governmental support and programs, as well as research going on in both the academic institutions and governmental bodies. So that made this sort of thriving environment for us. So For us, it seemed like a natural fit, and it has worked really well. I'll be very transparent in that our biggest end market now is the US, and we haven't seen the kind of consumer adoption and uptake yet in Asia that we thought we might get. I'm still bullish longer term, but I think the consumer is behind the Western consumer in terms of both approach to sustainable, adopting more sustainable dining habits, but also I think as well in terms of thinking about health and food. Um, and, obviously traditional Asian diets are incredibly healthy. Um, but unfortunately, I think they've kind of been tainted by Western influences in recent years. There's a lot of sugar and a lot of like unhealthy oils and stuff that get added in. Um, and it's a very fine line, but and as as economies have become a lot wealthier, a lot more meat heavy. So Hong Kong, for example, now is the number one per capita globally for meat consumption. Um, Traditionally, that would not have been the way, right? Like Asian cuisine stretched meat, and it was like very vegetable and plant forward, and it's kind of swinging. And then you had a lot of fast food and all of that kind of stuff, which this is no different to America, right? Where there's a lot of crap as well. But I think, particularly in coastal America, you see a big shift towards trying to eat healthier. And we've just seen faster adoption and interest in what we're offering. And part of it's also going to be price point. And we need to get our price down to make it more palatable to the mass market in Southeast Asia.
Mm. And are you guys a DTC or you have distributors in North America? How do you distribute your product right now?
Yeah, we're actually a B2B business, so we don't go direct to consumer, nor do we have a retail product. So we have two channels really that we sell into. So one is food service, so that's basically restaurants, and then corporate, college and university catering, all of that kind of stuff. A lot of tech campuses or universities have big catering programs. The other side of our business is what we call our industrial business, where we're selling our technology platform as an ingredient into food manufacturers so they can utilize jackfruit in their products, which then will go on retail shelves. And yeah, so we work with distributors, you're right, in the US and in Asia. So we are here in Asia, just not in the same scale and growth as we're seeing in the US. And those distributors then sell on to the end customer, which is those food service operators, and so on.
Well, and one last thing I'm curious about from everyone I talked to is like, you're into corporate, you did go into like technology in the sense like you worked at a startup, now you're a founder. Like, what are the big differences you're noticing between being an employee, whether corporate or startup, and being a founder? And do you regret going the founder route?
Definitely do not regret it at all. I think, I think for me, it's the breadth of stuff that you work on in a startup. And as a founder, I think, it's equal having worked in a startup and then become a founder. It's much more varied than a corporate role. There might be some people who get lucky, but I found it very monotonous. It's kind of the same thing over and over again. Um, and then, specifically as a founder, being your own boss it's an amazing experience and a challenge. You're really testing all aspects of your knowledge and growing personally and professionally, which I've really relished that challenge. It's obviously not come without its difficulties and stress, and it's true that it can be a lonely time. And there's definitely imposter syndrome as well, but overall, I wouldn't trade it. And I really love running my own schedule. Look, I've worked out over time the way I work and the way I operate, and it doesn't fit in that corporate mold of a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or 9 to 7, whatever it is. I like to break up my day and go for a run or something like that, and it makes me way more productive. And it's just, unfortunately, in on most corporates, that's not the reality. As I grow and build this business, I'm trying to emulate that freedom for my employees. But I think unfortunately large organizations often don't have that kind of flexibility.
Yeah, well, I completely resonate with that. And to me, that's one of the reasons I did it as well. Also, the ability to have direct impact. Every decision you make has some sort of impact, positive or negative, and you can immediately react to that. I really love that.
For sure.
Yeah, cool. I mean, this would be, it's been a really insightful conversation, I have to say. Like, I really appreciate learning more about this type of industry. I hope to see more from Karana in the future as well, and to hear some updates from you as well. Before we kind of wrap things up, do you want to shout out to anyone or anything?
I mean, first to my co-founders, Dan and Carsten, for sure. They do a lot of the heavy lifting with alongside me, and wouldn't be where we are. And then to all the farmers out there. I mean, honestly, I don't think they get enough recognition in our food system. And so, one of our aims is to bring the farmers along with us and make sure they're sharing benefit in this as well. And so, I want to end on that note, probably.
Love it. Well, Blair, it's been a real pleasure. On mine, that's the pod, and thank you for joining.
Of course. Cheers, Tim.